Welcome to Gather In, where you'll hear stories of conversion to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. If you have an interesting story to tell, please go to our Instagram page or send us an email to gatherin@proton.me. Welcome. To start with, welcome to the Gather In podcast. I'm just going to move back a little bit. I'm set up in a new studio now because this is the first podcast that I have done from my home in Victoria. So I was recently released from my mission with my wife. My wife and I served in the Australia Brisbane mission, and we've recently come home. It's about 3.5 weeks since we've come home, and this is the first chance I've had to do a podcast. So Milton, you are the first podcast from a little town called Lara in Geelong in Victoria in Australia, which is near Melbourne. Most people have heard of Melbourne. It's the second biggest city in Australia, so we're not far from there. And Milton, you are in Idaho.
Yes.
But that's not your, it hasn't been your home for long, has it? You've recently moved there.
Maybe for a month.
Is that all? And what town are you in, Milton?
And what do you say?
What town are you in? What city?
Rexburg, Idaho. So that's the town where the church has Brigham Young University, Idaho. So live here right across the street from campus.
Fantastic. Are you enjoying the beautiful weather in Idaho?
I love it. Today was our first day of snow, and I've only seen snow a couple times in my life, so that was really exciting.
Okay, yeah. Look, I can imagine. Yeah, it's just coming into winter, and you'll get lots of snow in Rexburg, I think, won't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Today.
Fantastic. So today's the first snow of the season.
Day,
Yeah. Okay, well that's wonderful. Wonderful that you've moved to Rexburg. So you're studying at BYU, Idaho, Brigham Young University, Idaho. I should give it the full name.
You're good. Everybody says BYUI.
I know, but some people might listen who aren't members who have no idea what BYU means. I have a sweatshirt that just says BYU on it, and I was told that the good answer to give people if they ask what does BYU stand for, it means boy you're ugly. I've never done that. I've never had the courage to say it to someone. So anyway, you've arrived in Rexburg to study, and we've talked once prior to this Instagram live podcast recording, and I know you're a relatively recent convert. Is it 18 months or so you've been a member of the church now?
Yeah, about a year and a half.
About a year and a half, okay. And what we'd like to get to a little bit later is how you came to join the church, and how you met the missionaries and all that sort of stuff. But what I want to talk about to start with, if we can, is your early life, where you grew up, what your family life was like, that sort of thing. Would you be able to start telling your story from as early back as you want?
Yep.
Let's go back to kindergarten. Go back to kindergarten if you like.
I can go back to my birthday.
Okay. Tell me where you were born. Yeah, good start.
So I was born in a part of Oklahoma called the Muskogee Nation, and so a lot of people, if you're familiar with Oklahoma, a few years ago they went to the U.S. Supreme Court and they won a case to where a lot of their land has been given back to the tribes that actually were native to that land. And so the area I was born in was called the Muskogee Nation. And so even though it's a part of the United States, it's actually also a tribal land. And so I was born and raised there. I was adopted when I was 10 months old. And so I went into another family. Their names were Bob and Angela. And they adopted me, and they adopted both of my sisters because we were living together with our biological mother, and she was unfit to take care of us. So we were taken in by them as foster children, and there were other foster children present. They were foster parents. That's what they did because they could not have their own children. They were infertile. And so they decided that they had always wanted one boy and two girls. And so it worked out perfectly, and they decided to officially adopt us. So they adopted us, and we lived in another area called the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, or the town was called Tuskahoma, and it was the Choctaw land. And we lived there, and they adopted us. We lived there. We went to elementary school there, all the way until I was in, I believe, kindergarten. And then my mother passed away. She was 47, I believe, and she had a lot of ongoing health issues, but she had passed away in the hospital because her brain wasn't getting enough oxygen. And so when she passed away, my father decided that he wanted to move us closer to his family where he grew up. So we moved maybe, I don't know, an hour and a half. It wasn't super far. And we moved to the town that he grew up in. And we lived with him there until I was 9 years old. And so we had been there maybe 2 or 3 years after my mother died. And then he died. He had a heart attack and he passed away. So when he passed away, his biological daughter, because remember, we were adopted. So he had two biological daughters, and the oldest one decided to adopt us. So we moved in with our sister, but his biological daughter. It's a strange dynamic if you have to follow along. And so we moved in with her, and she got married, and she had one biological son, and we moved to Arkansas. And so we moved to Arkansas when I was in the 8th grade. It was my 8th grade year. I started in Arkansas, and I lived there all the way until I graduated high school in 2020. And this was during the COVID-19 pandemic. I graduated early. And so I was 17 years old. I decided to join the military. And so at 17, I joined the military, and I went to a military base called Fort Benning. It's since been changed to Fort Moore, but for many years, over 100 years, it was called Fort Benning. And so when I lived there, that's when I found the missionaries. And so I won't go too far into that. I'll let you continue on. But that's the first place I met the missionaries, was there in Georgia in the United States.
Okay. Well, look, that is a fantastic summary, and I didn't know any of that really. So it's good. It's good to get that detail. I mean, I knew your parents passed away, but I didn't know that you'd been adopted twice. So you were adopted by your adoptive sister. So your adoptive sister became your mother legally. Yes. Wow. Look, that's quite an amazing story. So back to your story. So when you were growing up, you had basically two families you grew up with. Your first adoptive parents, who were actually foster parents, and then adopted you and your two sisters.
Yes.
And then you're adopted by their natural daughter. Tell me what part religion played in your life in the early days, as far back as you can remember. Were any of them religious people?
Yes, they were. So I lived in a very religious family. Specifically, they were in a Christian denomination called Pentecostalism. Some people are familiar with it, and a lot of people aren't. I get a good mixture, even here in Idaho. A lot of people say, never heard of it, and the other half says, oh, absolutely. And so I lived in a family that was Pentecostal. However, the church that we grew up in, Pentecostal is an umbrella term. And so the church that we grew up in was known as the Assemblies of God. Okay. So some people, now it starts clicking. People say, okay, I've heard of that. I've seen those around. Yeah. And so we grew up in the Assemblies of God. And so my mother, she was a Sunday school teacher. And my father, he was a secretary for the church. And mind you, they don't necessarily have what we consider in the LDS church callings, but that's basically what it was. It was their calling. Yeah. And so that's what they did until my mother died and until my father passed away. And so I grew up in a religious home. We knew the Bible very well. We went to church on Wednesdays, Sunday mornings, Sunday evenings, and sometimes more than that. And so I had a very religious background. I had familiarity with the Bible and with Christian doctrine, specifically Christian doctrine of that belief system,
Yeah.
not so much of every other belief system. But yeah, I grew up pretty familiar with Christianity.
Okay. So in the home, would you practice things like we do in most Latter-day Saint families, where we have, family prayer morning and evening,
Now,
scripture reading together, that sort of thing?
no, that's actually really uncommon outside of the LDS church.
Oh, is
And
it?
it's
Yeah.
something that, yeah, it's really uncommon. And that's something that I thought was just amazing about the LDS church was how they tried to integrate the church into the home. And I can't speak for let me take that back, because I can't speak for every Christian family or Christian church. But
Mm, sure.
in my home, it wasn't very common to do. We prayed before dinner, it wasn't, we talked about God and things, but we didn't have family home evenings,
Yeah.
and we didn't have family group prayers except for dinner, maybe breakfast or something. But no, there wasn't really like come follow me group studies or FHE. Those weren't really things. You just kind of did those things at church, and then when you came home, you were just expected to follow the standards that you were taught at church. So
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, you've only been a member of the church a little while, but you're very good at using church acronyms, which no one else will understand. FHE is Family Home Evening. For
yeah,
those who are listening who aren't members of the church. So, okay, Milton, that's an interesting little addition to your story of growing up. So when your adoptive sister became your mother, uh, became your adoptive mother. Now, did you say she was married and she had other children?
she got married after she took us in.
Oh,
So
okay.
the man that married her knowing that he would have to take in three other children. Yeah, and then they had their biological son after. Yeah.
Right. Wow. Wow. That's amazing. Um, so, how was religion practiced in that home?
And that home, it was the same because she was from the home that I grew up in. She had grew up in
Sure.
that home and moved out, so it was about the same. My mother, the sister mother, she's very still to this day also very religious and involved in the same church that I just spoke of, and it was great. I loved it. We had a lot of spiritual um, encounters or conversations. Never specifically, again, nothing like family home evening where it was a organized event, but it was still a very spiritually nurturing environment, I would say.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Okay. So, uh, you left home when you were 17 to join the military, and you're not full-time military anymore. You're in the National Guard now. So when you joined the military, that was a full-time job, if
Well,
you like.
I've always been in the National Guard, but it was full time for a while, only
Okay.
because I was going through like 6 months or almost a year of training, and then there's been a few occasions where I've went on assignments that were full time. So I've been to like um, natural disaster response for Hurricane Ida. I went to Guatemala for that wasn't natural disaster, but there was an assignment in Guatemala, and then there was just some other things we've done over time, just mostly natural disaster things like tornadoes or
Mm,
hurricanes, or when we were having a lot of political upheaval during 2020 in America, we were having the Black Lives Matter movement. There was a lot of riots going on, and so we
yeah.
had to also help respond to that. So there's been times where I was full time, but I've always been part time. And so while I was part time, when I came home from that training that was full time, I was working as an officer in prisons, and so that's
Okay.
that's another story in itself.
Okay.
That
Yeah.
was interesting.
Well,
Yeah,
that could be an interesting one too.
yeah.
So tell me, when you joined the military and went through your basic training, um, you'd come from a religious family. How did you fit in with the rest of the people you were going through training with? Was it common for, and I say this knowing that in the United States, people are generally speaking more religious than they are in Australia. Like in Australia, if you say to someone, what did you do on the weekend? And you say, I went to church. They say, you what? You went to church? Um, attending church in Australia is quite uncommon. But I know it's
Wow,
much more common in the
I
States.
didn't know that.
So, yeah. So how did you fit in that respect?
Um, so the funny thing is, they have a like a saying in the U.S. military that when people join the military, everyone becomes religious, and it's funny because it's true, and they don't do it forever though. But whenever we first joined and we started going to boot camp, they offer you multiple services, and so they say we have the Jewish synagogue, we have the Muslim mosque you can go to, we have the they would at the time they'd say you can go to the Mormon services. You have hundreds of Protestant churches, right? Baptist, Pentecostal, blah, 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 Methodist. And so they didn't have enough clergy or even people to operate that many different services. There's not even enough time in a day. And so they created one big service and they called it Protestant Collective. And I went one time and I was so disappointed because it was like a concert. They were, playing the guitars and the lights and the fog machines. And so no hate towards anybody that
Yeah.
participates in that, but it wasn't my religious traditions, and so I felt uncomfortable. And so when I went home, I thought to myself, and I thought, where should I go? Maybe I'll go to the Catholic Mass. I don't believe what they believe, but it's more reverent. And so I had a friend, and he would pray at his bed every night. He would kneel down and he would pray, and he had 3 books stacked up, and I knew
Oh,
whatever they were like scriptures. And so I'm like, okay, one of them is a Bible. So I'm like, I know he's Christian, but I don't know what the other books are. And so I asked him, I said, well, what are these books?
mhm.
And he said, well, I have the Bible, I have the Book of Mormon, I have the Doctrine and Covenants, I have the Pearl of Great Price. And I thought, my gosh, man, these Mormons or Latter-day Saints, they must be very academic people to read this many books. And so I asked him a lot of questions and I didn't understand it. Even when he explained it, I was very confused. But he invited me to go to church. And so I thought, you know what, I'll go to church with him. And so the next Sunday, we went outside to go to church, and all these people that would go to these church services, they would get bus rides. And so a bus would come and shuttle them to the Catholic Mass, shuttle them to the Jewish synagogue. And finally, it was our turn and they said, "Oh, we don't have a bus for you guys." And we said, "Well, why not? Everybody else had a bus ride." And they said, "There's not enough of you. There was 3 of us, and I wasn't even a member, so there was 2." And so they told us, they joked with us. They said, "Well, don't you people ride bicycles anyways?" And we didn't have bicycles, so we walked. So we walked to church, and I remember we went into church, and they did it backwards. I don't know why they did this, but they did the what do you call it? The second hour block first, and then they did the sacrament last. I have
Yeah.
no clue why they did it that way, but that's the way that the local priesthood leadership decided to do it. And so, um, while everyone would go to the priesthood meetings or the elders quorum or the relief society, they wanted me to go meet with the missionaries. And so the missionaries took me in a room, and there was a bunch of other investigators or friends, as we call them there. And then I came back the next week, and all those people that were there, they were gone, but I was still there. And so they said, "Oh, we don't need this big room anymore." We went to a different room. And so they started teaching me. And the first lesson, I know it's changed over the years, but because this was 5 years ago, I joined 2 years ago, but this was 5 years ago. So the first lesson was called I have a Father in heaven who loves me, or something like that. And so they taught me about the Heavenly Father. They taught me about the premortal life. And that's what caught my attention. That's the number one thing that kept me coming back, was they was teaching me about this premortal life, and that I lived with God himself at one point, and that I existed before I came to the earth. I never heard such a concept. I was always taught that when people are conceived naturally through, human intercourse, that then when that body is created, God provides a soul to that body. I was never taught that the soul pre-existed, and when a body is created, it's then filled with that soul, right? And so I'm like, wow, maybe I have a deeper purpose, a deeper meaning, a divine identity, something along those lines, however you want to word it. And so it just really, 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 really was like a magnet to me. And I kept coming back, and every time they teach me something that would just blow my mind more and more. So then they taught me the plan of salvation, and they taught me about work for the dead. They taught me about temple work for the dead, and that my parents, remember my parents had passed away. And so they taught me that you could be baptized for your family members who have passed away, and you can still be sealed to them who have passed away. And it was, they taught me about the plan of salvation, the multiple kingdoms of heaven, the celestial kingdom, the terrestrial kingdom, the celestial kingdom, and then outer darkness. And so in the end, they had my attention, and I kept coming back for maybe like 3 months or something. And so they invited me to be baptized. And so someone from the bishopric, I think, interviewed me, and they said, do you believe this and believe this? And whatever the interview questions are, I can't remember. And I sustained it all, said yes, 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 or no, no, to some of those questions. And they said, do you want to be baptized? And I said yes. I was ready to be baptized. And they started getting out a yellow piece of paper, and they said, okay, well, we need your mom to sign this. And I was like, hold on, wait a minute. Because my mom's not going to let me be baptized. And they said, yeah, you have to be 18 to do it on your own. If you're 17, you have to have permission. And I was just heartbroken. I was like, there's no way. They said, just give us her number. We can call her. And I said, no. I said, I was too scared. I was like, just paralyzed in fear, because I knew that where I'm from, before I moved to Idaho, almost nobody there. We have one ward, and almost if you tell people you're LDS, they're because everyone there is Protestant, and so we're kind of like outcasts. And so I was scared, and so I didn't do it. And so that's when I went back home. And so I'll let you pick up from there. But I left after maybe 2 or 3 months there. I left, and I went back home to Arkansas because I had graduated from the basic training. And so that puts me at that point in time.
Yeah. So after you were told that you couldn't be baptized without your parents' permission, did you continue to attend church for a while there?
No. So I promised them I would. I told my missionaries, I said, I promise I'll continue. I said, as soon as I get home, I'll go to the elder. But I don't know. I went home, and I was just full of pride. I thought, you know what? I made it out of that place. I don't need religion now. I don't, because I grew up in a religious home, but at this time I'd kind of quit being religious. I was kind of like, I've gone through so much in my life that God doesn't really care about me. And I kind of just gave up on religion altogether. However, their
Sure.
message still stuck with me, and they continued to reach out to me. They'd call me, and the local missionaries would call me, and I would just hang up, and I'd like, they don't care about me. There's all these religions they want to recruit. It's no different at this church or this church. And so I was letting all these negative thoughts just fill my head, and so I quit going to church for maybe like 2 years or something. And so one day, this was during the COVID-19 pandemic, I was getting really depressed. And when I say really depressed, I don't mean where you have a bad day and you're sad. I mean so depressed to where I wouldn't wash my dishes for weeks, or wouldn't do my laundry, or wouldn't take a shower. I had finally decided that I wanted to go to a therapist. And so I started going to a therapist. And I remember when I started meeting with him, I'd go in his office, and I would just cry and just cry, and I would talk about how my parents died, and how all these things that I had been through, and so he really helped me get a lot better. And so when he kind of helped stabilize me, I thought to myself, I'm going to go to church. And so I, like, almost like as if I had repeated the process. I didn't go back to the LDS church immediately, because I knew some people personally at the local ward, and they knew I wasn't the best individual. I didn't have the best habits. I drink alcohol and things like that. And so I said, they'll judge me, they'll think I'm weird for coming to a place of righteous people and being a bad person. And so I'd go to churches like the Catholic Church and the Episcopalian Church and the Baptist churches, but I wasn't happy. I didn't like it. And so I was like, man, it's like, maybe I'll just give up on going to church again. And so I just prayed about it. When I prayed about it, I felt this feeling that said, just go back to the LDS church. And so I decided, I said, I'm going to go to comeunderchrist.org, and I'm going to put in a request online to meet the missionaries for them to come to my home. Before I could even type it into the browser on my iPhone, I got 2 Facebook notifications for 2 friend requests. And I was like, who is this? And so I opened my Facebook app, and it was the sister missionaries at the local ward. And so I immediately accepted both friend requests, and I waited just a few minutes, and they messaged me, and they told me, hi, Milton, we're the sister missionaries. And they didn't know me. They didn't know I had ever been taught. This wasn't a referral. They just found me, and they sent me a friend request, and they started talking to me. And so they started messaging me, and I was still, I know this sounds strange, but I was still very defensive. Even though I was seeking out a church, specifically even the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, when they would teach me, I would push them away because it was like I wanted to search for myself. I didn't want somebody to tell me what to believe. I didn't want people to tell me what was true. I wanted to find it for myself. And so I was very like, no, you're trying to brainwash me, get away, I know that sounds silly, but that's how I was. And so they said, let's just call you. You don't have to come to the church. You don't have to go anywhere. We'll call you. And so they called me. And I just remember feeling the Spirit so strongly. They missionaries usually don't ask for someone to be baptized on the first lesson. They do it after they've been meeting for weeks or months. But they felt impressed, and they said, do you want to be baptized? And I said, yes. I said, I want to be baptized. I want to repent. I want to change. I want to do all those things. I want to feel clean again, and happy. And all these things I want them to go away. And I just knew they were like a light at the end of the tunnel. I just knew it's what I needed to do. And so they said, well, meet us for a lesson at the ward building, the chapel. And I said, okay. And I stood them up. I didn't come. And they were pretty upset.
No.
I felt guilty, and so they continued to reach out to me. I thought they would give up. After that, I said, they'll leave me alone. I'll go about my business. But they continued to reach out to me. And so I finally did meet them. I came to the chapel, and they taught me the lessons again. And it's funny because they asked me, how much do you know? And I told them a little bit, but I had forgotten so much of what the missionaries in Georgia taught me. I didn't know I had forgotten that much. So they started teaching me again, and they brought up premortal life again. And it was like, ding, like a light bulb came on, and all the doctrine that I had been taught was just coming back to me. And so I remember the plan of salvation, the temple, work for the dead, the premortal life, all those things came back to me. And so I went through the lessons, and I didn't want to meet like once a week. I said, I want as much as you can teach me. So I would meet with them like 2-3 times a week. And I loved it. I would come. Sometimes I'd come in dirty work clothes. I'd get off work and I'd come straight there. I was so excited. And I would tell them it was something about what they were telling me, their countenance, that just drew me in. And I remember thinking to myself, I said, I don't know a lot about these Mormon people, but I was like, they're just so happy, And so I thought, they're doing something right. And so I would continue to take the lessons. And of course, I accepted the invitation to baptism. And after I had taken all the lessons, I was baptized. And I think that was May 22nd, 2022. And so I was baptized by my friend from high school. And he was a member. And so we had been friends in high school. And so it's funny. Life is just like one big circle. I was right back there, and I had been baptized. And so that's where I was in that point of time. I decided to be baptized.
Tell us about the connection with your friend from high school. So where was he through all this time, and how did that?
He was.
How did you reconnect or whatever?
So he was always a member of the church since birth, and we worked together in a restaurant, and so during high school we did, and so then I left for the military. We didn't keep in touch. We didn't really talk or anything, and so when I first started coming to the ward in that local area again, that was also their first time seeing me, and they were kind of like, huh, they weren't rude, they were really welcoming, but they were excited to see me. And so that's how I was back in touch with him. And so we kind of created a bond, or a connection, you could say, because we knew each other when we were younger. And so there's not a lot of members in that area that are young single adults or what we call YSAs. And so we kind of created a friendship. And so during that time that I was learning from the missionaries and I wasn't yet a member, we would go out and we would eat at restaurants or we would hang out in our free time. And so we just built this relationship, this friendship. And so when they told me, you have to choose someone to baptize you, there was no doubt in my mind I wanted to choose him. And so
Yeah.
it's really interesting because he baptized me, he ordained me to both priesthoods, the Aaronic and the Melchizedek. He conferred the gift of the Holy Ghost upon me. He escorted me through the temple for my endowments. So the whole covenant path, it was like he followed
Wow.
me. Yeah, that's really awesome. So
Yeah, that's there's been a lot of things through your life that have led you to this point that you're at now, where you're
yeah,
now a very, from what I can see on Facebook and Instagram, your posts on Facebook and everything, you're a very active member of the church, and you're not scared. You're not scared to say what you believe. You're quite upfront about your beliefs and everything. I'm guessing you're probably quite a good member missionary.
I, I would hope that they would say so. I actually was able to baptize my friend not long after I was baptized. So he was living in maybe an hour or so away, and we also went to high school together. And so he was going through a really hard time in his life, and he wanted to move back closer to his hometown, but he didn't have the resources. He didn't have the money, the job, and I just felt I saw it as a missionary opportunity, and I felt overwhelmed. I said, just move in with me, just move in. I went and I picked him up and he moved in. And I was teaching him even before he moved in. I would call him and I would say, listen to what these people teach me. And no one would listen to me except him. All my family, all my friends, they did not want to hear it. They was like, absolutely not. It's a lie. Don't believe it. And he would listen though. And he was really receptive to it. And so he also decided that he wanted to meet with the missionaries. And it was the same missionaries that taught me because this was so close back to
Yeah,
back. Then
yeah.
I baptized him. And so we
Oh,
joined. He joined right after I joined. And we were living together. We go to sacrament together. And, now we've parted our ways in life and he's still doing successful and doing his own things. But it was so awesome to know that even though I hadn't yet served a mission, I was able to have just one person, to teach and to learn, and they chose to be baptized.
yeah. And he's still involved, still
Yeah,
active in the church.
yeah.
Yeah, you're
So
just
he's doing well.
living in different
Yeah,
places. Now,
just
you
different
mentioned
places now.
you mentioned then that you haven't yet served a mission. Is that is that on the cards? Is that part of your future plans? You're still easily young enough. What are you? 21 years old now, I think, Milton. Is that right?
22. Yeah,
22.
22.
Okay.
So it's always been complicated for me to explain to people because I'm still in the military, and so I don't get done until sometime in 2025. It was like 6 years because it's part time, so it's a lot longer than people
Yeah.
that do it full time. So the commitment is longer, and then there was things like when you decide to serve a mission, you're not supposed to have financial obligations, and so I'm still actively paying the loan off that for my car, for my vehicle. And so these things were kind of getting in the way. And so I did pray about it. They said, well, just pray about it. And I prayed and I didn't feel impressed to go. And I thought, oh, I don't know, because everyone says go, it's what you're supposed to do if you're a strong young male. And so I went to my bishop and he said, it's your agency, you pray about it. And so I did, and I didn't feel impressed. And so I moved to Idaho and the guilt was getting to me again. And so I went to the bishop again, and he said, I don't feel impressed to call you. And so when I got my patriarchal blessing, I remember, not word for word, but along these lines, it stated that um, I would do a lot of work in the temple, that was in a way my mission, that I would serve in the temple, and that I work for the dead, such as my parents and their families. And it even stated that if you choose to serve a mission, you'll be blessed. And then it goes on to talk about how you'll be an amazing father and a husband. And so as I prayed about this, I never really felt impressed to go. I rather felt impressed that I would soon be getting married and would kind of serve in the priesthood as a father or as a husband. And so that's kind of the direction I've leaned in. I don't really feel impressed to go on a mission right now, but I have absolutely nothing against it. So I could go in the future, but as for right now, I don't feel impressed to go, and I don't exactly plan on it. I felt impressed rather to come to BYUI and continue in my studies. And if I was to go after I was out of the military, I would probably be 24 years old and maybe get home when I was around 26. And that's not bad. There's a lot of young people that do that. But that kind of scared me in a way. I was like, oh my gosh, I'll be so old, you know? And so I just, right now, I don't feel impressed to go, but maybe in the future I'll go. Maybe even as a senior, as you and your wife just completed. So
Yeah.
I guess we'll see.
Look, I'll tell you something about my personal life. I'm a convert as well. I joined the church and was baptized when I was 24 years old. I then had my 26th and 27th birthdays while I was serving a mission in the New Zealand Christchurch mission. So I was a little bit older than you, and I just really scraped in time-wise as far as being able to serve the mission. The uppermost limit has been 26 years of age, I think, for quite a long time. But I know of someone who was 30 years old when he was a convert to the church, and he served a mission as a young man when he was 30. So, you know, awesome. Yeah, so the rules can be bent in a way in that it's flexible. And I know just from talking to you for this short time now, and you know, as I said, having seen your posts on Facebook for quite a while now, you would be a fantastic missionary. But I also believe that, yeah, if you get married and have kids, you'll be a fantastic father and husband as well. So wherever life takes you, you'll succeed, I'm sure.
Well, I'll tell you something really interesting, really quick about the temple thing. So I remember how I told you the patriarchal blessing continued to emphasize on the temples. And so that's part of the reason I felt impressed to go to Idaho. Was at home in Texas, my temple was over 3 hours away, 3 hours. And so coming here, I would be, the apartment I live in now, I was 1 mile. And so I moved here and I thought, okay, I'm here now, Lord, what do I do? And so I continued to go to the temple in my free time. I went as often as I could. And then one day the stake president's counselor called me and they said, we want to meet with you. And so I thought, okay, I wonder what this is. And I went in and I got a calling, and they called me to be the second counselor in the elders quorum. And so I accepted the calling, and they wanted me to go to a training session, and they said, you'll learn what you need to do. I didn't know what the second counselor did. I've always had thoughts in my head, but I've never really known. Well, my job in this presidency was to organize temple and family history work for the ward. And I thought, whoa, you know, like it's almost, you know, it's really interesting to see how it all kind of weaved itself together, and the puzzle pieces kind of came together, you know. So I do feel like I've been fulfilling that role that I was called to, you could say. And so it's just really interesting to see how when you obey the Holy Ghost's impressions in your life, how you can, over time, it takes a while, but you'll see those puzzle pieces come together. And so,
that's fantastic. Have you also been called as a temple worker at all?
No. I thought about volunteering. I'm still, I want to do it actually. I've been thinking about talking to the bishop about it, so we'll see. Yeah.
I don't know if you saw my interview with Tim Cabal. Tim Cabal was the actor who played, well, no one's seen it yet, but he plays the role of the Lord of the Vineyard in the Book of Mormon movies. Oh, yeah? And Tim is a young man, a little bit old, you know, he's probably 10 years older than you, served a mission, wandered off the path for a little while, but came back. He's on the State High Council, and he's recently been called as a temple worker. So
that's awesome.
You know, it's something a single man can do, and my wife and I have both been temple workers for many years. And so I can highly recommend that as a great way to serve as well. And being the Elders Quorum presidency member responsible for temple and family history work, you know, it connects well with being a temple worker. So put your hand up for it. It's something you can just put your hand up for, and let the temple presidency know you're available, or let the bishop know you're available, and you love to serve. And I can highly recommend that. It's just fantastic. And something else I can tell you is that my wife was a temple worker before I met her, and I actually met her in the temple. So she was a returned missionary as well, and she was serving in the Sydney temple. And at that time, we only had one temple in Australia, in Sydney, and I was living in Melbourne at the time. And I used to travel to Sydney regularly to attend the temple. And every time I went to the temple, which was always on a Saturday, Saturday was her day to work in the temple. And so I used to notice this attractive young lady working in the temple. And then one day, I went to the temple in the morning and she wasn't there. And I was disappointed. She had no idea who I was, because I was just another patron, but I recognised her because she was at the temple every time I went there. She wasn't there in the morning, but then I thought, I'll stay and do an afternoon session. Anyway, she wasn't there as a worker, but she came on the session as a patron. And back in those days, if there wasn't a married couple to be the witnesses on the endowment session, they would just ask two people in there, and they asked me if I would be one of the witnesses, and they asked her if she would be the other witness, and that is how we actually met.
It was almost like a foreshadowing.
Well, I was sitting there thinking, I'm going to marry this girl. She was sitting there thinking, I don't know, this guy from a bar of soap, but and afterwards I got changed as quickly as I could. I waited out by the car park. I waited for her to come out. She came out, and I thought, this is my opportunity to talk to her. I was sitting down on a bench that was beside the footpath there. I said, come and sit down. I want to talk to you. That was that was back in 1995. And so we've been married 23 years now. We were married in 1996. So I say this only so that you know the temple is not a bad place to meet young ladies. And there's a certain what's the word? You know who you're meeting if you're meeting someone in the temple. You know a certain amount about them. You know that they've been a member of the church for over a year. You know they're worthy to have a temple recommend, and that's a good place to start. So I can recommend that. Anyway, back to your story. So you've been a member of the church now for 18 months. You're serving as a counsellor in the Elders Quorum presidency. Have you had a calling back in Arkansas?
Yeah.
Where you were baptised in Arkansas, I'm correct?
In Texas.
Did you have a calling? Sorry?
I was baptized in Texas.
Texas.
The town is in Arkansas and Texas. It's actually on the border, so.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So how long were you a member of the church for? You were ordained to the priesthood fairly quickly. What was your first calling? Did you have a calling back in that ward there?
Yeah. So the first one was they didn't have. So let me give you some context. They didn't have any YSA wards in that area. There's no such thing as YSA wards or stake because there's not enough YSA. There's not even enough members. And so they kind of did like their own version of a YSA ward within a family ward. And so it was just an auxiliary like the Relief Society or the primary or the Young Women's or Young Men's. They just had YSA. It was an auxiliary. And so they made me the YSA representative. And so we kind of ran our own little YSA group. And then after I did that for however long, I don't know, they called me to be the Elders Quorum instructor. And so I taught Elders Quorum 2 Sundays out of a month. So I would rotate with another brother. So he would teach 2 times a month. I would teach the Elders Quorum 2 times a month. And then when I came to Idaho, I've never seen this. Whenever a semester starts in a student YSA ward, they give everybody a piece of paper, or now it's electronic. They give you a link and they say, what are some former callings you've had? What are some hobbies you have? Things like that. Okay. And so because people get released so fast, they come one semester and then they move apartments and they get put in another ward. So the callings are always filling and opening. And so I put on there that I had been an elders quorum instructor, thinking nothing of it. And then that's when they called me to be in the elders quorum presidency. So that's been interesting.
Okay, fantastic. Milton, it's been so good talking to you today. We've followed each other on Instagram and Facebook for a few months now. It was
Yeah.
while I was still serving as a missionary with my wife that I think I found you. I think you might have borne your testimony of the Book of Mormon on the Flood the World
Flood the world,
page.
flood the world. Yeah,
Yeah,
I remember
Flood
that.
the
Yeah.
World. I'm pretty sure that's where we met, and yeah, so it's been just great learning more about your story, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of people who'll love to hear. Whoa, love to hear. Sorry.
You're fine.
So you've watched some of my podcasts. You know the pattern here.
Yeah.
You know, my last couple of questions are usually, what's your favorite aspect of the gospel, and would you bear your testimony for us? Now, before we get you to do this, I'd just like to say thank you to those people who have logged on and listened to this live Instagram feed today, and just to tell everyone that it'll stay on the Gather In podcast Instagram page, but it will also be downloaded, edited, and uploaded as a podcast. So you'll be able to listen to it wherever you get your podcasts. It'll also be on Facebook and on YouTube as well. So it'll be available on all those platforms. So follow us on Instagram and all those other platforms, and you'll be updated every time we do a new interview. So Milton, over to you now. Tell us about your favourite, and I think I know what it's going to be. Tell us about your favourite aspect of the gospel.
My favorite aspect of the gospel is
Yeah.
the sealing power. So
Okay.
you probably knew that. Yeah, my favorite aspect, one of my favorite things about the restored gospel of Jesus Christ is the sealing power of the priesthood. And so for my friends who don't know what that is, or people listening that don't know what that is, allow me to teach you. So when I was growing up, we were taught that when people would die, they could go to heaven or they could go to hell. It was their choice. They had agency or free will. And so, but I was also taught, not everyone is taught this, but in my religion, we were taught nobody would recognize each other in heaven. In heaven, people are in their resurrected bodies, but they don't have their families. They don't have their wife. They don't know their children. They're just children of God in a perfect paradise, worshiping God for eternity. To me, it was like imagining an angel playing a harp on a cloud for 1,000,000,000 years. It sounded miserable. I'll just say that. I hate to say it like that, but it does. It sounds miserable, and nobody would admit it. Everybody said, I want to go to heaven because heaven's better than hell, but it didn't sound fun. It sounds terrible. And so the missionaries taught me that the sealing power is where when you're in the temple, the priest of authority can seal families together forever, so that even in the next life, in the celestial kingdom or heaven, that this family would still be together. Well, I thought I didn't count because my parents were dead. So I said, I was offended, actually. I was like, whoa, so everybody gets to be with their family but me, huh? But that wasn't true. They taught me that even people who have died can still be sealed to their children or to their husband or to their wife or their grandparents. And they taught me that. And so then I thought, well, I still don't qualify because I'm adopted, right? I was adopted by the parents that passed away. And they said, no, you can be sealed to the parents that adopted you. So I was able to be sealed to the parents that adopted me. I was able to be sealed to them even though they passed away. And now I have the hope and knowing that I'll see them again and we'll still live together as a family in eternity. And it gets even better than that because I found out I can seal their parents to their parents and their parents to their parents. And then when I get married, I can be sealed to my wife. And it's just this big, long chain that goes all the way back to Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother, right? And so it's just this one big human family all the way from God to Adam down to whoever the last man that lives on the earth is. And we're all going to recognize each other. We'll still be families. We can still be sealed to each other even if someone dies before they're sealed. Even if they weren't a member of the church, you can be baptized for them. So my parents weren't members of the LDS church, and I was baptized for them, And I know that in spirit world, they can accept that work that I've done on their behalf. And, we can act for other people just as Jesus acted for us. So Jesus died for our sins. He was a proxy for us. When we're baptized for others, we're acting in place for them. And so what this teaches us is a lesson of selflessness, right? We're doing for others. As Jesus did for us, we should do for our brothers and sisters. And so that's probably my favorite thing about the gospel of Jesus Christ, is just that families can be forever. Everyone can be forgiven for their sin through the atonement of Jesus Christ. And no matter what you've done, we can all return to the presence of God, even as a family.
Fantastic. That's a pretty powerful favourite aspect of the gospel, as well as its testimony, really. I mean, it's so obvious that you know what you know is true, and that you're living your life according to what you know. You know the Saviour. You talked about your life prior to becoming a member of the church, and we all have aspects of our personality that possibly aren't so desirable. You've changed those things, and whatever mistake you make in the future, that you can repent, that the atonement of Jesus Christ covers everything in your life that needs healing, including your soul as a result of sin, and being able to forgive people and find forgiveness in your heart for people. It's all covered by the atonement of Jesus Christ. It's obvious that you know all that. Milton, thanks for your time today. It's just been fantastic.
Thank you.
Again, to everyone, this will be available on podcast, YouTube, Facebook, and still on the Instagram page here. And you'll see the occasional reels coming up of quick clips that I'll take out of this chat with Milton to keep the awareness up that the full interview is available. Thanks again, Milton. Been just fantastic talking to you, and all the best for the future. Bye for now.
Thank you. I'll see you later.